I have had an overwhelming number of requests. Everyone wants to see all of the parts that I put on my parts counter. This is kind of a greatest hits video. We're not going to do a teardown today. We're just going to cover the most broken and interesting parts, which is, I guess that's the best part, right? These parts all came from engines I've torn down in the last couple of years. I got this idea a couple of years ago, started saving parts long before I did videos. And I kind of did that because it's cool stuff to look at. My customers come in, they have something to put their hands on and look at while they're waiting for their parts to be pulled or while they're waiting to check out. So I kind of decorate this place with car paraphernalia, which, I mean, it's a car place, so I should. So I've arranged this stuff in order of what I think is the least interesting, and the stuff at the end is what I consider the most wowing. Now, I don't know if it's actually that cool. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. The first thing I'm going to show you is actually not an engine part, but it's an engine computer. This is a 2006 Chrysler 300C with a 5.7 liter. It's an engine computer from that vehicle. I actually got this from a customer. A large portion of my business are Chrysler engine computers. I stock probably 1,000, 1,200 of them at any given time. I sell them pre-programmed. I can change calibration. I can do all kinds of things with these things. It's a huge chunk of my business. I had a customer come in and told me he has one that had a slug in it, and I didn't really know what that meant. I mean, I know I grew up in St. Louis, so you would think I'd know what that means, but it actually means it's been shot. It has I think it's a 38. I could be wrong. But this is why he needed to replace it. A Chrysler computer that didn't fail except somebody shot it, which is just, that's crazy to me. Anyway, this stays on my countertop. I'll probably get rid of it at some point, but it's just too cool not to keep up here. The first actual engine part I want to show you is a rod and piston from a 2.3 liter Mazda Speed 6, Mazda Speed 3, or a CX-7. It's an MZR engine. And this is more memorable than it is cool because this was the hardest rod and piston I've ever had to remove from a crank. It was welded. You can still see there's some bearing material, some Reynolds bearing foil stuck on that. And I had to get this glowing red hot and use a sledgehammer for probably 15 minutes just to get this off of the crank. It was the most destroyed crank I've ever seen that wasn't broken in half. It was a lot of work. The next thing is a rod and piston from the Viper teardown. There is a video on this teardown if you'd like to see it. Check out the playlist with all my broken engine teardowns. This is kind of cool because I didn't even see this damage when I took the engine apart. This engine had dropped a valve seat more than one time, and this is one that was obscured by carbon, and we didn't see the damage until we ran it through our parts washer. So because it's from a Viper and it's kind of cool, we keep that on our countertop. This rod and piston is out of a GM LS7, and this is actually the first engine teardown video I ever did. I did this last Christmas. And the piston is pretty messed up here. There's lots of damage on the skirts on both sides, and that's because the rod was bent. And this is a titanium rod, so it takes a lot of force to do that, and it's bent in multiple directions. It's actually compressed. This tried to compress water, and it failed. I mean, it might have actually compressed it. I don't really know, but the end result was a very locked up engine, a cracked sleeve, and a cracked block. That engine was actually sold. We did sell it, and it is back in service, so that's kind of cool. This set of parts is actually out of two different engines. These are out of Gen 4 GM 5.3 and 6 liters. And this was a very catastrophic video. This is out of the 5.3, both of these parts. That's the video where when I pulled the pan, a bunch of aluminum gravel hit the floor. And as you can see, nothing was spared. This is one of the better rods that also did not have a piston on it. It still has a wrist pin in it, which I can turn, but I can't get it all the way out, I don't think. Maybe if I had to press. This rod's destroyed, and this engine, I really don't know what caused this to fail, but it did blow up in glorious fashion. This is a very bent push rod from an L86 or an LT Gen 5 GM V8. This is one of the direct injected 6.2 liter engines. And this is what happens when you break a valve spring, drop a valve, and then the piston meets the valve. Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's the only push rod I've got up here, but it is definitely worth keeping up here. Here I've got an intake valve from a 6.1 liter SRT8 Hemi engine. This dropped a valve seat, which held the valve open and let the piston hit it, well, many times. But it survived pretty well, I think, all things considered. And it cleaned up very nice, so it's a nice counterpiece. One of the first parts I had up here. While we are on the topic of 6.1 liter Hemi engines, this is one of my favorites. This is actually in one of, I think, the second or third 6.1 liter teardown. This is the most bent rod that I've ever seen with a piston relatively intact. The piston is actually broken underneath the wrist pin from making contact with the counterbalance on the crank. But that piston, I mean, look how far that thing turns. It's awesome. This is definitely one of the coolest pieces on my countertop. This is a 5.9 liter Cummins rod and piston. And this actually came out of an engine I had one of my employees tear down recently. I've had a couple of those engines come in, and I am just amazed at the piston. I am so impressed. It's falling apart, actually. I mean, it speaks for itself. It is so devastated. See the different levels. I mean, it's just, I think this had an injector failure, likely not at idle, likely while towing something or under a lot of boost, but not very recognizable from the top. Pretty impressed that the rest of the piston stayed together. The rod is undamaged. The crank was good. The block was destroyed. The head was destroyed. That injector was destroyed, although that's likely why this is like that. Yeah, I figured you guys would get a kick out of this. Also, this is extremely heavy and probably a weapon if you choose to use it as such. We are ramping up here in excitement. Well, I guess, I don't know. I'm probably the only one that dorks out on this stuff. But this is a rod and piston from a Gen 4 6 liter out of an LY6, which is an iron block. This is what comes in like 3/4 ton and 1 ton trucks and vans. And the rod is actually in really good shape. Unfortunately, it dropped a valve. And when it dropped a valve, it put a perfect hole in the piston. The intake valve just fits perfectly in here. And I think this dropped a valve seat, or it actually broke a valve spring, and that's what led to this. Unfortunately, the valve was not saved. I had one of my employees take this engine apart, and he kind of like left this up to me, like, hey, what do you want to do with this engine? We were able to save the block. The block had no damage. The crank had no damage. The only damage was one cylinder head and this piston. So I put another rod and piston in it and sold it as a buildable short block, which is really good for me considering how catastrophic of a failure this is. But this is definitely the most interesting failure I've seen as far as not damaging the outside of the crown of the piston. The skirts are fine. Everything's fine. It's just the top of the piston. And this is the last set of parts I'm going to show you today. These are actually out of a vehicle that I bought from the auction. This is kind of early on when I first started buying vehicles from Copart and IAI. And I'm not very happy about this purchase, but it was a very good learning experience. There's a company out there called Pedal, and they basically buy the junk car from your backyard or your driveway. They haul it to the auction and try to make some easy, quick cash on it. It's a great business model. I wish I had thought of it first. But the vehicles, in my position, are something to stay away from. They typically have some pretty bad issues. They're not usually wrecked. They're usually something that sat underneath a tree for 5 or 6 years. I have gotten some good ones, so it's not like you can't get some good cars that way. Just typically, it's other people's junk. And this was listed as a run and drive on Copart. This was a 2007 Chevrolet Silverado 1500 Classic, which is the 3-7 body style. It had an LM7 5.3 liter V8 in it, and it, again, 123,000 miles, listed as run and drive, is kind of beat up, something I was going to put into service, fix whatever it needed, and throw it back on the road. And that did not happen. It turns out the engine was locked up. It would only turn 200 degrees in either direction, and this is why. This is a rod and piston out of that LM7, and the most amazing thing about this is that the entire valve was inside the combustion chamber. It fell completely out of, destroyed the piston, and it actually was kind of sitting like this. We pulled the head off, and it was just kind of sitting like this. It did unfortunately mark up. The cylinder wall is pretty bad, where it would need like 10 or 10 over or so. So there were still some salvageable parts on it. I parted the truck out, sold the rear end, sold the trans. I did okay. It was not a loss, but it was kind of a charitable labor situation. But the valve itself, it's just amazing how it's bent. It must have happened at idle. I mean, I have no idea how, I don't think this could ever happen again. Sorry guys, none of these parts are for sale. As far as I'm concerned, if they've made it to the counter, they are part of the shop. I get emails on people trying to buy these things almost every single day. If you are local to the St. Louis area and you want to come by and buy some parts from me, you can play with these all you'd like. I also have this gigantic piston on my counter. This is out of a Curtis air compressor. It has 3 huge compression rings and an also very large oil control ring. There's actually nothing wrong with this, but I found this at one of the scrap yards that I deal with, and so I brought it home, but don't worry, I cleared it with them first. I also have a jack stand. I actually have a pair of these. These are from my grandfather's service station. I think they date back to like the late 20s or early 30s. I would never dream of using them as jack stands today, but it's nice to keep some of this old stuff around here to remind myself of where I came from. I also like to mention that I read every single comment. They're hilarious. Even the criticism, the comments, the concerns, I love all of it. I'm never going to put music in my videos. I'm never going to put a cheesy intro in there. I'm not about all that cheesy. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I have a business to run. But this is fun, and it's getting way bigger than I ever thought it would. I never thought that all of you guys would love to watch me take these broken engines apart. It's just, it blows my mind, but I'm happy to continue to do it, and I'll catch you on the next teardown.